Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Kimberly Benson, and I am a Human Resource Benefits Director. I have more than 10 years of HR leadership experience, and much of my work has been centered on benefits strategy, compliance, and organizational design. To start, I think over the years I've noticed something important. Even the best benefits or policies don't matter if employees don't feel safe, valued, and supported. Everybody wants to feel supported. If you look back and you've worked at places that you've worked at over the years, if you look at places that you didn't feel like you belonged, or you didn't feel safe or comfortable or even valued for what you're bringing or giving to that organization, you don't feel as though that is the right employer. And honestly, research backs this up. Gallup found that organizations with engaged and supported employees see 21% higher profitability compared to disengaged workplaces. And that realization is what inspired me to bridge human resources and counseling together. They've been together all along, but today we're actually going to bring them together. We're going to bring counseling into the workplace. And I think this is so essential. Trauma informed care is the missing piece in many organizations. And today we're going to explore how applying it can strengthen both people and performance. And I believe this is a reality. Honestly, trauma informed care is a framework that shifts our perspective from asking, "What's wrong with you?" Why do people do that? What's wrong with you? Have you ever wanted somebody to come up to you and go, "You're not doing it right, your computer won't work," and they say, "What's wrong with you?" Why don't we change that? What's wrong with you? Nobody likes to hear that. And to stop saying what's wrong with you. I can't say it enough. What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? To what happened to you? That's all it takes. No more what's wrong with you, what happened to you. Howard Bath describes three pillars: safety, connection, and emotional regulation. Why does this matter in workplaces? Because trauma is more common than we think. Listen to this. According to the CDC, 61% of adults report having experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. One. Every one of us has had at least one adverse childhood experience, such as abuse, neglect, or just household dysfunction. I know on a daily basis I grew up with household dysfunction. These experiences often show up later in life, including at work. When workplaces adopt trauma informed principles, they tap into, uh, you know, resilience. Studies have shown that trauma informed programs reduce burnout and they increase engagement. This isn't just a theory, it's measurable. Embro- if you think about it, employees bring their whole selves to work. And again, you go back to that question, and I'll say it again and again and again. At work, I tell my managers, what happened to you? Not what's wrong with you. This is one that some people don't like to hear, but I say manifestations of trauma in the workplace. Honestly, trauma shows up in the workplace every day, and at least workplace behaviors. And absenteeism and turnover, the American Institute of Stress estimates that job stress in the US costs employees over $300 billion annually due to absenteeism, turnover in the most expensive, and lost productivity. Conflict is another huge thing that we need to touch on. Research shows that unresolved trauma can make employees 2 to 3 times more likely to experience interpersonal conflict. And then, there's the next big one, burnout. How many people can say on a daily basis, "I'm burnout. I can't do it anymore. I'm stressed." I I can look over at a coworker right now and she would tell me she's stressed, she's burnt out. It's the end of the world. She needs a vacation. Famous last words. According to the World Health Organization, burnout is now classified as an occupational, not organizational, an occupational syndrome, and trauma exposure increases vulnerability to it. For example, I once worked with an employee who frequently missed deadlines. She couldn't keep up. And on the surface, it looked like disengagement. But when we later discovered, when we went into kind of like a small collaborative, we later discovered that her untreated anxiety tied to past trauma was the actual cause. And with accommodations and support, her performance turned around. It's simple, but it's not simple. But it's asking those right questions and seeing how we can help. And, you know, when leaders understand trauma responses, they stop labeling people as difficult. Oh, they're tough to work with. And instead begin asking the right questions. I think, this is where HR policies and counseling principles, they intersect. At a policy level, we need to come up with new designs, and I will preach this 100 times. Flexible leave policies. There are days when you do not want to be at work. There are days where you just need to get away. I don't want to quit my job. Don't say that I'm going to be punished because I need a day off. Everybody needs a day off. And companies today, they come in with new designs where they penalize somebody for taking 2 hours off work. I don't want to penalize anyone. That is not the future. That is not companies. We have to design a buy-in. We have to be flexible and create these leave policies. And Deloitte research shows, now listen to this, that employees who feel supported with flexible work are 2.6 times, now that seems small, but it's not, more likely to be engaged. Trauma-informed employee assistance programs are essential, and they make companies flourish. Yet, now get this, the Society for Human Resource Management reports that less than 40% of employees use, less than 40%, that is such a large number, the employee assistance programs, often because they don't trust the confidentiality. They're afraid. They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid somebody's going to be mad at them. They're afraid they won't get the promotion. Trauma informed, what we're trying to do with trauma informed is redesign this, all of it, so that we can increase participation, stop the retaliation, stop everything. We need to start training managers and training. We need a training for managers, and studies show that leaders trained in trauma informed approaches reduce turnover intent by up to 25%. Empathy isn't just about being soft. Oh, it's not that. It has hard results. A business solver, a business solver study found that 90% of employees are more loyal to empathetic employers. If you have somebody that's going to be kind and listen to the problems that you have going on, you're going to be more likely to approach them. A boss that says, yes, I want to hear you. I want to hear the problems that you're going on. And that he or she or they or them, they will listen to you. Um, Psychological safety. Google's Project Aristotle found that psychological safety is the number one predictor of high performing teams. And I totally believe that. If you feel safe and engaged in your company, you want to work there. You want to make the best. You have to have that buy-in. And when we connect counseling and informed practices with HR, the payoff is retention, loyalty, and better performance. You know, let's step back and relax. Take a breath. Let's look at a case study. At one company, employees returning from medical leave were quitting shortly after. And we all think, a lot of us became new parents. And when we returned from work, the only thing that we can think about is we are bad. At least this is in my case, and several people that I've discussed it with. We are bad. We are throwing our child in at 6 weeks. We're throwing our child in a daycare, and we're coming to work for 9 hours. So, we have that hour for lunch break that we may go to the daycare. We may sit there and just breathe, but 9 hours. Imagine if you had an employee assistance program that allowed you to come to work for only 4 hours when you're returning. A slow reintegration program. Say that goes on for a year. No, and there will be no ramifications. There will be nobody that's mad at you. You won't lose your performance. You won't lose your seniority. You won't lose anything. Look at it one. Let's go back to the case study. At one company, employees returning from medical leave were quitting shortly after. Instead of assuming laziness, leadership asked what's going on. They developed a phase-in return to work program. Employees started part-time, had mentors, and received check-ins. And the result here was a 30% increase in retention and significantly higher engagement scores. And this isn't isolated. In 2021, American Psychological Association survey found that when workplaces supported mental health, 91% of employees reported higher in motivation and productivity. Trauma-informed practice don't just help people, they protect the bottom line. If you are at a company and they support you, you're a pregnant mom, and you have to take off work because you have to go to the doctor. You are a dad and you're going over to adopt your first child, and the child has medical issues or even mental health issues. There's all of these things and you don't want to leave. Or there's another situation altogether. I'm just using that as an example. When you take all of this into consideration, or another entirely different scenario, when you take all of this and put it in, if you have a company that's willing to work around this, allow you to work 2 days a week, allow you to work 3 days a week, allow you to do anything to integrate you back into the company and keep your performance, keep your seniority, keep everything about you that's wonderful, you will stay. You're not going to leave that company. Employees want to feel as though they're supported, not, you don't want to feel like you're being demeaned or that something bad's going to happen to you. To go back and look through, we need to look at ethical and cultural considerations. And I think, when we have the trauma sensitive leave policies, the enhanced employee assistance services, the manager training, the leadership practices, we model empathy, we build trust and create a psychological safety, we are in the positive. So I think now we need to look at ethics, confidentiality, boundaries, and fairness. So you're in a situation where you work with a person and you feel as though the mother that's on maternity leave or the father that's on maternity leave, they're in a situation and they're going in and out, and you feel as though you're taking on the majority of the workload. So that's when an employee assistant program would also kick in. In that circumstance, they're going to the employer needs to have that empathetic stance where they want to help as well. You need to recognize all, not just for parents, but all diverse trauma experiences. If somebody's upset and says, I'm overwhelmed because I can't take all the work because she's out on maternity leave, then we need to create an environment that helps them. We need inclusive workplace policies, and we need to support everyone, even our marginalized groups. You know, how do I put this? Confidentiality, according to the Society for Human Resource Management, 1 in 3 employees don't trust human resources. Well, that's not good, you know? And they don't trust us to keep sensitive issues private. Without confidentiality, trauma informed approaches fail. And boundaries, HR is not therapy. It's just not. You don't know how many times that I've gone home and said, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? And all with, in retrospect, it was just try to help someone. But HR is not therapy. But we can, if we have human resource managers that get the additional education, we can begin to bridge the two resources together. We need to have boundaries stating that HR is not therapy, but we can, and then fairness, where we can balance compassion with accountability. I think trauma affects, if we look at cultural points, let's step back for a minute. I've got to touch on this. If we, honestly, trauma affects groups differently. For example, if we was to go into um, employees of color, I was trying to think of how I would approach it. Research shows that employees of color report workplace discrimination at rates nearly 50% higher than white employees. And then LGBTQ plus workers are more likely to face hostile environments. Um, and those are more recent studies. And veterans, for example, experience post-traumatic stress disorder that affect workplace performance. When organizations fail to consider these cultural dimensions, they risk reinforcing trauma instead of alleviating it. So, a lot of times when you go into a workplace and somebody comes up and, the manager said, oh, what you call is having a problem again. Well, or, what you call it feels discriminated against or rolls their eyes. These are things that happen very, very, very commonly. And these are things that we really, really need to address and we need to stay on top of. And that's where we kind of need to step back to where we were before with the accountability. We need to bring that trauma informed care into the workplace with ethics, culture, and know what our bottom line is. I think, if you take a veteran and they have PTSD, it affects workplace. And if we continually, and I'll say this again and again, and it's so common for us to do, when we fail to consider these cultural dimensions, we risk reinforcing trauma instead of alleviating it. I think, let's take for a minute. If we were in an open discussion, I would say I'd like to pause and think, and I'd like everyone that was listening to this to consider the time when you witnessed a workplace conflict. You watched two employees, argue. And then what was the result of that? Two people argued at the workplace, whether it be a manager or employee or just two employees. Next, what you noticed was workplace conflict. Okay. So you see that you had an argument. Then after that, what are the after effects? Disengagement and then burnout or burnout. I mean, could trauma have played a role? How, you know, what would happen from that? How might a trauma informed approach have changed the outcome if we would have, go back to the beginning? Those two questions. Here's a scenario. Okay, let's do this one. And I want you to think about this, even though we can't interact back and forth. An employee receives constructive criticism and reacts very angry. Traditional HR might move straight to discipline. That's it. It's done. They get a write up. That's it. But a trauma informed approach asks, could this be a trigger response? And I think that's what we need to do nowadays. It's not a soft approach. It's not just an empathetic approach. We need to really look at the full situation and what's going on. Instead of punishment, we might provide coaching. There has to be that outside approach. We will be more successful as employers if we take the outside approach. We're not coddling employees. We're not building bridges. We're not making temporary, flex bridges that will break away. We're creating a sustainable workforce, and we're doing it with empathy and care practices. Instead of punishment, we need to provide coaching, support, um, employee assistance program referrals. Reflection helps us shift from reactive management to proactive, supportive leadership. And resource supports this shift. Um, Employees who feel supported by leadership are 4.6 times more likely to be engaged at work. And that was from a Gallup poll in 2020. Conclusion, I guess, and takeaways. Let's review the key lessons here. Trauma is widespread. Let's back up. Honestly, trauma is widespread. More than half of adults carry experiences that may impact how they function at work. These experiences show up in absenteeism, disengagement, conflict, and burnout. And trauma informed HR policies and leadership can transform cultures. It's so essential. Trauma and informed HR policies and leadership, those two together can transform cultures. Case studies and research prove that impact, higher retention, lower turnover, greater productivity. Ethics and cultural competence are essential. It is the key. It is the key. I think the financial case is clear too. Turnover costs can range from 50 to 200% of an employee's salary. 50 to 200%. And that's of an annual salary. Preventing just a few resignations more than pays for trauma-informed initiatives. I think in a later presentation, I can show the cost range that the turnover costs have and the effect they have financially on a company. The human case is even stronger. Workplaces that are safe, connected, and supportive not only keep employees, but they help them thrive. As someone who has spent over a decade in HR and is pursuing counseling and PhD in organizational design, I am passionate, and I can't explain how passionate I am about bridging these two worlds. My hope for the future is that you leave here today with both the inspiration and the practical tools to begin integrating trauma-informed practices into your own settings. I think that the goal here is to know that trauma-informed practices, they reduce burnout and they reduce turnover. We need to build cultures of trust, safety, and resilience. It is so essential. Collaboration between human resources and counseling is essential. And again, when we inspire and use practical tools, we can begin integrating trauma-informed practices into our own settings, having reductions of 50 to 200% in cost. Retention is a complete key, and we can do that by we can reduce burnout and turnover, and we can do that by just installing trauma-informed practices into our workplace. All right. Well, I appreciate so much, and you have no idea. I know I've been long and long-winded, and sometimes I get a little bit off the subject, but I believe today that I really believe today that I hope I've had something for you to take away. I've given you something to think about and mull over, and maybe take into consideration in your own workplace. Um, we're going to take a second and go over the references. For today, we used the Institute of Stress, where we use the Institute of Stress, where all organization tracking for well-being together, you know, with this research, we can tell a consistent story of trauma-informed workplaces are not just healthier, they are stronger, more resilient, and successful. I had to leave you guys with that. Now I'm going to go ahead and read my resources and my references. Today we used Bath 2008. We drawn a lot of our information from there. There were so many articles and so much, and Bath was so thorough. They used so many resources. It was incredible. So we pulled a lot of our information from them. That was the 3 pillars of trauma-informed care: reclaiming children and youth. We used Knight 2015. That was trauma-informed social workplace practice. 90% of the information that we drew, a lot of times I use 5 to 10 resources, but these 3 here were so informative. And I encourage you to go back and look at them. We use the Knight 2015 Trauma Informed Social Workplace Practice in the Clinical Social Work Journal. The last one was the SAM-SHA, and that was Trauma Informed Care and Behavioral Health Services. Um, I I can't say how much of a resource this was. I would say anything that I did not get from Knight, the Trauma Informed Social Work Practice, and Bath, I got from them. Um, the Trauma Informed Care and Behavioral Health Services, I mean, the amount of information, and along with Bath, the 3 pillars of trauma informed care, all 3 of these together, it was enough. And I encourage anybody who's looking for information to go out. And I do want you to remember that, you know, I'm going to say it once more. The financial case is clear. Turnover costs are lowered. We prevent resignations, and we support our employees. So all of the information I've given you, along with our references, is enough to have you leave here today with both inspiration and practical tools to begin integrating them into your practice. So, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me. I look forward to having you email me any questions, anything that you want to go over, anything that you want to talk about. But remember, let's go ahead and click back here. We're going to go ahead and take 2 seconds and click back to the beginning. We're going to click back to the beginning. I know we froze for a second, but we're going to go ahead and click back. And remember, this is the most essential thing that I want everybody to remember. Trauma is overlooked in the workplace. So trauma-informed care asks, what happened to you, right? Not what's wrong with you. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for taking the time. I will be here. I will take questions, anything you need. You have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.